The phone rang at 2:47 in the morning. Marlo Voss had been awake already. She almost always was at that hour, sitting at the small kitchen table of her apartment in the south end of Boston with a cup of tea gone cold and a medical journal she was not reading. Sleep had become a negotiation since her mother died, and most nights she lost. The apartment was quiet in the way that only winter apartments are quiet, the kind of silence that has weight and texture, that presses against the windows from outside like something alive. She answered on the second ring. Dr. Voss, speaking. She was already standing, some physician's reflex pulling her upright before her mind had fully engaged. The voice on the other end was measured, unhurried. The voice of someone who had rehearsed, not sounding like they were in a hurry. Someone recommended you. You treated a man named Herrera last spring. Bullet wound. No police report. There is a car outside your building. Black Suburban. The driver will wait 10 minutes. The line went dead. Marlo stood in her kitchen for a long moment. She looked at the cold tea. She looked at the window where the orange glow of a street light pressed against the glass like a held breath. She thought about calling the police. She thought about not answering the door. She thought about Miguel Herrera, who had come into the free clinic on Tremont Street with a through and through in his shoulder and enough cash in his coat to buy her silence and eyes that said please without saying anything at all. She had not called the police then either. She thought about her mother, about the things Delia Voss had told her in pieces late at night in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and endings, about the world that existed underneath the one most people saw, about names that meant something to people who knew how to read them. She put on her coat. The Suburban smelled of leather and something metallic she would later understand was gun oil, though in that moment she filed it under machinery, under things that had nothing to do with her. The driver was a broad man with a neck like poured concrete who did not look at her in the rearview mirror and did not speak. The city moved past the tinted windows, the wet glitter of Boylston Street, the amber pools beneath the lights on Commonwealth Avenue, then across the river and north into neighborhoods that grew quieter and larger the farther they went, until the houses became estates and the estates became something else entirely. Properties that existed behind walls and iron gates in the careful darkness of old money. They stopped at a gate, wrought iron 12 feet high, the kind of gate that communicated something specific to people who could read such things. Whatever happens behind me is not your concern. Beyond it sat an estate that was Italian in its bones, pale stucco and terracotta, and a courtyard fountain that was not running in February, its basin white with frost. The main house was 3 stories of pale stone, every window dark except for 2 on the ground floor, which threw amber light onto the frozen gravel drive. A man in a dark suit met her at the car, young, tightly wound in the way of men who have been trained to hold their tension inward. Dr. Voss, this way. Inside the house smelled of wood smoke and something floral. Old roses, the ghost of a woman's perfume. The entry hall was marble and dark wood, a curved staircase rising to the upper floors, paintings on the walls, Italian landscapes of Madonna rendered in oil, a portrait of a man with heavy-lidded eyes who might have been anyone's grandfather, wealth that had forgotten what it cost. They moved quickly through a corridor and into a room that had once been a study, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk as large as a lifeboat, but tonight it had been transformed into something else entirely. A man lay on the leather Chesterfield sofa against the far wall. Marlo crossed to him before she had fully registered the others in the room. That was training. That was the discipline of 9 years in emergency medicine. Find the crisis and move toward it. The man on the sofa was unconscious. Mid to late 30s, she assessed immediately, though the pallor of blood loss aged him. Dark hair, a face that even in extremity carried a quality of authority, sharp jaw, strong brow, the kind of bone structure that survives nearly everything. He was broad-shouldered, dressed in what had been an expensive shirt before someone had cut it open. The wound was left side mid-abdomen. Someone had packed it competently with clean linen, and there was an IV line in his left arm, running fluids from a bag hung on a standing lamp. Who put in the IV? She asked without turning around. I did. One of the watching men stepped forward, 55 perhaps. Silver-haired, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He moved with the economy of someone who had been trained to do things under pressure and had not forgotten how. I was a medic. Army. She examined the line. Good angle, good placement. She opened her bag. Tell me what happened. He was shot. I can see that. She was already cutting away the dressing, assessing the wound. Entry only, no exit. The bullet was still inside. The packing had slowed the bleeding but had not stopped it. Single round. What caliber? 9 mm. We believe. Time of injury, 90 minutes ago. She had 2 fingers on his wrist. His pulse was weak but present. Blood pressure low. She looked at the wound, at his color, at the shallow rhythm of his breathing, and she understood very clearly what she was working with, what she did not have, what she needed to do anyway. He needs a real operating room, she said it evenly. He needs imaging I don't have here. He needs blood. That is not possible. She turned then for the first time and looked properly at the silver-haired man. Then he may die. He will certainly die if you don't try. The man held her gaze without flinching. We understand the risk. So does he. When he has been conscious, he has been very clear. He does not go to a hospital. That is his instruction. Marlowe looked at the man on the sofa. Really looked at him. The way you look at something you are about to be responsible for. The strong jaw, the dark lashes against the white of his cheeks, a scar bisecting the left eyebrow, old and faded. Another at the corner of his mouth. A man who had been in the vicinity of violence before and had survived it and had apparently made arrangements for the next time. She made her decision. She had been making this decision in various forms for years. She made it when she finished medical school and chose emergency medicine because emergency medicine was where the desperate people came. She made it in the free clinic on Tremont Street. She made it in increments, each one smaller than the last, until making it felt less like a choice and more like the only available direction. She said, I need more light, and I need the room cleared except for you. She worked for 3 hours. The bullet had lodged against the iliac crest, a lucky trajectory all things considered. It had missed the major vessels and the bow by margins that suggested either extraordinary luck or something in which Marlowe had stopped believing during her residency. She irrigated. She debrided. She sutured in layers with the supplies from her kit and additional materials sourced from somewhere in the house, a first aid room, apparently by the silver-haired man whose name she learned because he told her twice to stop calling him, You, Harlan, he said. Harlan Dace. She didn't ask what else was in the first aid room. Some things were more useful when unknown. The patient regained partial consciousness around 4 a.m. He didn't speak. He opened his eyes, dark eyes, the iris barely distinguishable from the pupil in the low light, and looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not fear, not pain, or not only pain, something assessing. Even here, even in extremity, he was assessing. You're going to be all right, she said, because it was what you said and because she believed it was probably true. He closed his eyes again. By 6 a.m, she had done everything she could do. The bleeding was controlled. The wound was closed. He was on IV antibiotics that Harlan had produced from the same mysterious room, along with morphine and an array of other pharmaceuticals that Marlowe chose not to examine too carefully. She washed her hands in a marble bathroom off the study. Gold fixtures, a soap dish shaped like a seashell. She dried her hands and looked at herself in the mirror and thought with the particular clarity that comes at the end of a very long night that she was 31 years old and had just performed emergency surgery on a stranger's sofa in an estate she had never been to before, in the care of men whose names she did not know. She was her mother's daughter. This was apparently what that meant. When she came back into the study, Harlan Dace was waiting with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and she took it because she needed it. He's stable, she said. For now, he needs monitoring. Vitals every 2 hours. The antibiotic drip maintained. Fluids. If he develops a fever above 101, if his pressure drops, if there is any sign of abdominal rigidity. You'll still be here, Harlan said. She stopped. Your things have been brought. He said it simply, the way you say things that have been decided before the conversation began. You'll be comfortable. Constance will see to it. Marlowe kept her voice level. I have a job. Dr. Voss. He set down his coffee on the desk. He was not threatening her. She understood the distinction. He was simply being clear. You know who this man is? She looked at him. She thought about lying. She decided against it. I know who the Crow family is. Then you understand why you cannot leave. He picked up his coffee again. When he is recovered, when it is safe, you will be returned to your life. You have our word. My name is Harlan Dace. I am this family's consigliere. And yes, my word. Marlowe looked at the man sleeping on the sofa. The patient, the unconscious man who had planned for his own shooting and had not planned to survive it in a hospital bed with a name on a chart. She looked at the still face, the dark lashes, the old scar through the eyebrow. Then she looked at Harlan Dace and said, I want my own room with a lock. And I want to call my hospital. I'll say I have a family emergency. A brief pause. Of course, and if he dies, she said, I walk out of here and no one stops me. Harlan considered this for a moment. Then he said, if he dies, I suspect no one will be thinking about stopping you. She slept 4 hours in a room that was not hers. Pale blue walls, white curtains, a bed with ironed linen, flowers on the dresser that she hadn't asked for. She woke to February light coming thin through the curtains and the sound of the house settling around her in the cold morning. She checked on her patient. He was awake. He was lying very still in the way that experienced patients lie still when they understand pain management. His eyes tracked to her the moment she entered the room, and that assessing quality was there again. Good morning, she said, because someone had to. Doctor. His voice was lower than she had expected. Slightly accented, the Italian faint but present. Vowels given a little more room than an American would give them. Voss. Marlowe Voss. Yes, he looked at her with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. How bad? The bullet missed your major vessels. You lost significant blood, but we managed the bleeding. You're on antibiotics. You'll have pain for some time, and you'll need to limit movement for at least 2 weeks, barring infection or complications. She paused to take his pulse, looking at her watch. You should recover. He watched her do it. He watched everything she was noticing. Nothing escaped that dark gaze. Harlan tells me you want to leave. I want him to go back to my job. Yes. He said it without apology, without elaboration. Not yet. She sat in the chair she had pulled close during the night's work and looked at him steadily. She was not going to be afraid. Fear was a reasonable response to this situation. It was not a useful one. She had learned long ago to be useful. Stellan Crowe, she said, Don of the Crowe family, 3rd generation. You took over from your father 8 years ago. You're considered by people in a position to know pragmatic, by the standards of your world. Something moved in his face. Not surprise exactly, a recalibration. You know more than a doctor should. I know more than most people about a lot of things, she said. Your wound needs to be checked. Will you let me do that? Or is the head of the Crowe family going to refuse medical care out of pride? A silence. And then from the corner of his mouth, the shadow of something that was not quite a smile, not warm exactly, the suggestion that such a thing was not entirely hypothetical. Do your job, doctor, he said. The estate had a name, Villa Ashford. Marlowe learned this from Constance, the housekeeper, who communicated through the offering of things. Food information, small observations delivered with the casualness of someone who has decided that a person who is staying a while might as well understand how things work. Constance was 62, built like someone who had been standing in kitchens her entire life, and had apparently decided with the swift practicality of a woman who had survived 3 generations of Crows that Marlowe was going to be useful and ought to be treated accordingly. The Don's grandfather built it, Constance told her, setting a breakfast tray on the kitchen table the second morning. 1948. He came here with a name that meant nothing and built something. She surveyed the kitchen with an expression that contained the entire history of that sentence. The name is a small irony, I think. Ashford. Nothing particularly serene ever happened in this house. What did happen? Marlowe asked. Constance gave her the look of a woman who has answered questions carefully for decades. The usual, she said, and turned back to the stove. Marlowe ate and watched the garden through the kitchen window. A man patrolled the perimeter, not conspicuously, but the pattern of his movement was regular, and the earpiece was visible when the light caught it at the right angle. Another man at the gate. She counted at least 6 in the house or on the grounds. Probably more she had not yet identified. The house was a fortress pretending to be a home, and the pretending was very good. The rhythm of those first days established itself with the logic of captivity, which is its own kind of logic. You find the shape of what you are in. You learn to move inside it. Marlowe checked Stellan Crowe's vitals every 2 hours. Blood pressure, pulse temperature, the wound. In between, she had the run of the house. The library with its shelves of Italian literature and American fiction, and one very old Dante with illustrations she had been working through since the second morning. The garden frozen but walkable. Her room with its blue walls and white curtains, and the lock she had asked for which functioned. What she did not have was her phone. Harlan had facilitated her call to Mass General. She had used the landline in his office while he sat across the desk and did not pretend he wasn't listening. But her own phone had been taken at the gate quietly and without discussion and had not been returned. She understood why. She stored the anger of it in a cold and useful place inside herself where she kept such things. Stellan Crowe was a difficult patient, not in the way she had expected. He did not rage or refuse treatment or demand things that were not possible. He was worse than that. He was compliant in the way that powerful men are compliant when they have decided to be compliant, which is to say he tolerated her presence and her examinations with a cold patience that communicated beneath its surface that this was a temporary arrangement of his own choosing and he was simply enduring it. He answered her medical questions in full. He did not answer other questions at all. On the third day, she found him sitting up when he should not have been. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. He was holding a phone different from whatever had been taken at the gate, thin and dark. There was something in his expression that was new, not pain or not only pain, frustration, which was interesting because she would not have predicted that his face was capable of it. He seemed too controlled for frustration. "Something's happened," she said. A pause. "Nothing that concerns you. Everything in this house concerns me right now." She crossed the room and checked his drip with the reflexive thoroughness of habit. She touched his forehead without asking permission and felt the warmth there. "Not dangerous? Not yet. I need you lying flat. I need to make calls. You can make calls lying flat." Another silence. He was weighing things. She could see him doing it. Then he moved carefully with the deliberate discipline of a man who understood that conceding to necessity was not defeat and lay back against the pillows. He held the phone against his chest. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "I didn't do it for you, I know." She settled into the chair. "But you'll do it for yourself, which is fine. Your body doesn't care about your reasons." She opened her medical notebook, the blank one she had found in the desk in the blue room, which she had begun using to keep the clinical record of this case that no official record would ever reflect. She recorded the temperature. She wrote the time. Outside, the February wind moved through the pines at the edge of the property and made a sound like the sea. "Why did you become a doctor?" he asked. She looked up. It was the first personal question he had asked her. "Because I'm good at it." "Everyone is good at something." "That's not why." She held his gaze for a moment. "No," she said, "it's not." And she went back to her notes and did not answer. And he did not press her. And that particular question hung in the air between them like something neither of them was ready to examine directly. On the fifth morning, she found the portrait gallery. She had gone upstairs looking for Constance, who had mentioned leaving fresh towels on the landing. She had not been to the second floor before, not because she had been told not to, simply because she had not had reason. Instead of towels, she found the portraits. 3 generations of Crowe men in oil and in silver photograph frames arranged along the upper hallway. The grandfather barrel-chested, silver-haired, even in what must have been middle age, a face like a clenched fist. The father slimmer, more elegant, with the same heavy-lidded eyes she had seen in the painting downstairs. And Stellan younger in the portrait, not yet the Don, but already carrying that quality of contained force in the set of his shoulders. He was standing in a garden. This garden, she realized. Or this garden in summer, the fountain running. He was not smiling. But there was something in his expression that was not yet the man on the sofa, something that had not yet been closed off. Beside the Stellan portrait, a younger man, the same bone structure, the same dark eyes, but everything softer, turned upward at the corners. He wore his suit the way young men wear suits before they have learned to be uncomfortable in them. "My brother." She turned. Stellan was in the doorway. He had climbed the stairs, which he absolutely should not have done. She started to say so and stopped because his expression, as he looked at the portrait of the younger man, was the most unguarded thing she had seen on his face since she had arrived, and interrupting it seemed wrong. She said instead quietly he should rest. "Benedict," his voice was different, lower. "He's in Seattle. He doesn't know I was shot. He cannot know." "Why?" "Because he would come back." He said it simply, And then with the particular restraint of someone who has made a decision so many times it has become architecture, he said, "This isn't a safe place to be. I've worked for years to keep him away from it." Marlowe looked at the portrait of the young man, who looked like a softer rendering of the man behind her. She looked at the easy smile the suit worn without weight. "You built him a way out." "I tried." Something in his voice that was not quite ease. Something in him that was never quite ease. She was beginning to understand that this was simply the register in which he lived. Everything held at a slight tension, like a string tuned up. "You need to go back to bed," she said. "You climbed a full flight of stairs. You had abdominal surgery on a sofa 4 days ago." He let her take his arm without comment as they moved back toward the stairs. She felt the solidity of him even diminished by blood loss. There was a substantiality to this man that was almost architectural. Built, she thought, like something that expected to last. They descended slowly. "Your grandfather," she said to keep him talking. "He came from where?" "Calabria." He took the steps with care. 1946. He had a name that meant nothing, and he built something. A pause. Or built something into something else. Is that how you think of it? Building. That is how he thought of it. His voice was careful. "I don't romanticize it. How do you think of it?" They reached the bottom of the stairs. He stopped and looked at her with those very dark eyes. "Inheritance," he said. "You don't choose what you're born into. You only choose what you do with it." She thought of her mother. Of the things Delia Voss had told her in the last weeks of her life, the full inventory of it delivered in pieces when the effort of keeping it was finally greater than the effort of giving it away. "No," Marlowe said quietly. "You don't." She walked him back to his room and said nothing more about fathers or inheritance or the weight of what gets passed down whether or not you want it. On the seventh day, Harlan Dace came to the library. She was reading. Actually reading not as an alternative to activity, but because she had finally reached the point where she could. He sat across from her without being invited, crossed his legs, and was quiet for a moment in that practiced way of his. "He's improving," Harlan said. "Yes, the fever broke yesterday. I'm cautiously optimistic about the wound." "You're a good doctor, I know." He almost smiled. He didn't want a doctor brought in at all. "I want you to understand that I made the decision." Then he regained enough consciousness to confirm it. "But my first instinct was correct. Without you, he would have died." Marlowe set her book down carefully. "Is this leading somewhere, Mr. Dace?" "Harlan." He unfolded his hands. "It is leading to honesty, Dr. Voss, which is not always something this house is built for, but which I believe you deserve." She waited. "Someone tried to kill Stellan." He leaned forward slightly. "This was coordinated. The information required to plan it, the route, the timing, the security window, that information belongs to a very small number of people, which means someone inside this family sold it." He paused. "Until we know who everyone outside these walls is a risk. That includes anyone who knows Stellan is currently vulnerable." He met her eyes. "Including you, which is why your phone has been held, which is why you're here." He let that settle. "But also why, Dr. Voss, you may be safer here than you would be elsewhere. Whoever arranged this knows a doctor was called. They may know your name." Marlowe absorbed this. She was practiced at absorbing things. "Yaltov," she said. The shift in Harlan's expression was slight and immediate. "How did you hear that name?" "I didn't hear it. Constance mentioned a Russian family has been expanding into new territory over the past year, and there is a photograph on the Don's desk. The man in it has specific tattoos on his hands." She paused. "I pay attention to things. It's part of the job." Harlan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are not what I expected, Dr. Voss." "What did you expect?" "Someone more afraid." Marlowe picked up her book again. "I'm afraid," she said. "I'm simply not going to show you." She found the photograph on the 9th day. She was not looking for it. That is the truth, and she held to it then and afterward because she had enough to account for without adding intention to the inventory. She was looking for a pen. She had gone through the library and the sitting room and the desk in her blue room and had found nothing that wrote. Constance was somewhere in the garden. She tried the study. She found a pen on the side table, heavy in the hand, a gift from the engraving on the barrel, and she was already turning to leave when she saw the photograph on the desk. Not the surveillance image of the man with the tattoo she had noted before. That one was still there. This was different. A new photograph placed on top of it, printed on plain paper from a printer somewhere in the house. Grainy, slightly blurred, taken from a distance in what appeared to be early winter, the background smudged with cold air. Two men in conversation on a Boston street corner. She would not have stopped. She would not have looked. Except that one of the men in the photograph was her father. She knew his face from a single photograph, the one her mother had kept for 30 years in a small wooden box at the bottom of her bedroom closet. The box Marlo had not been meant to find. The box she had found anyway at 17, sitting on the floor of her mother's room while Delia was at work, and had opened and had seen the face inside. Her mother had told her some of it that night. The rest came years later in the hospital room. The full weight of it, delivered in pieces when keeping it, was finally more exhausting than releasing it. His name was Alexa Strand. Her mother Delia had met him in 1991 at a gathering in New York that she had no business attending, and that he had been at for professional reasons she had not understood until later. He was 30 and spoke 4 languages and appeared to be in international finance, which in 1991 meant several things, and she had not understood which of those things it was until it was too late to unknow it. When she understood, she left. She was pregnant. She did not tell him. She went home and then came back and built a life from careful pieces and raised her daughter and told her only as much of the truth as she believed a child could carry. At 24, Marlo had received the rest of it. In a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and endings, Delia Voss had finally set down the box. Remember that name her mother had said? Alexa Strand, if it ever comes near you, be careful. Marlo stood in the study of Villa Ashford and looked at the photograph on Stellan Crow's desk. Her father was standing on a Boston street corner in a surveillance photograph belonging to the man she had spent 9 days keeping alive. She placed the photograph back exactly where it was. She walked back to the library with the pen. She sat down in the chair she had been using for 9 days. She did not open the Dante. She did not move for a very long time. The man she had saved was hunting her father, or her father was involved in whatever had put a bullet in the man she had saved. Or both things were true at the same time, which was the specific geometry of the world her mother had warned her about. Not either and or. Both. Always both. She sat in the library with the weight of it pressing against the inside of her chest, and she thought about what her mother had carried for 30 years. The specific exhaustion of knowing something that no one around you knows and pretending every single day that the weight is not there. She was not going to do that. She was not ready to speak. Not yet. She needed to understand first what she was holding, what it meant, what it would cost to say it aloud in this house to this man. But she was not going to be her mother. She was not going to keep something in a box at the bottom of a closet and let it sit there while the weight of it slowly took everything else. Not yet, she told herself, but soon. Outside the window, the February garden sat frozen and still, and the amber light from the house fell across the gravel in long planes, and somewhere in the walls of Villa Ashford, the old house settled and breathed with the memory of everything that had ever been carried inside it. And Marlo Voss sat in the library in the quiet and began carefully and without hurry to decide what she was going to do. She found him the next morning before the house had fully woken. The kitchen was empty except for the smell of coffee Constance had left on the burner before going out to the garden. February light came through the window in thin gray sheets. Marlo poured 2 cups and carried them down the corridor to the study and knocked once. Come in. He was already at his desk. He should not have been at his desk. He was sitting up straight and reading something on the thin dark phone, and his color was better than it had been yesterday, which was something, but the line of his jaw was tight in the way that meant he was managing pain rather than not feeling it. She set one of the cups on the desk in front of him without asking. He looked at it, then at her. She sat in her chair, the chair that had been hers since the first night, the one angled slightly toward the sofa where she had worked, and then toward the desk once he had been well enough to sit up. She wrapped both hands around her own cup and looked at him directly. I need to tell you something, she said. He set the phone down. He gave her his full attention in the way he gave everything his full attention, which was completely and without apparent effort. I saw the photograph on your desk, she said. 2 days ago. I came to find a pen and it was on top of the other papers. He was very still. The surveillance photograph. The 2 men on the street corner. She paused. I know the man on the left, a silence that had a particular quality to it. Not emptiness, density, how he said, One word, flat and careful. His name is Alexa Strand. She said it the way she had practiced saying it in her head for 2 days evenly, without weight, as though it were a clinical fact, and not the thing her mother had kept in a wooden box for 30 years. He is my father. I have never met him. My mother left him before I was born. She kept one photograph. And I have been looking at his face since I was 17 years old, and I would know it anywhere. She watched something move through Stellan Crow's face that she had not seen there before. Not the usual recalibration. Something deeper. Something that moved through the architecture of his composure and left a hairline fracture before the stone closed over it again. He stood. He moved to the window, the one that looked out over the frozen garden, and stood with his back to her for a long moment. She could see the precise control in the line of his shoulders. The effort of thinking without being observed. "Say the name again," he said quietly. "Alexa Strand." He turned around. "How long have you known who your father is?" "Since I was 17. My mother told me pieces. More when she was dying." She held his gaze. "She told me to stay away from that name, that if it ever came near me, I should be careful." His jaw was tight. "Your mother was wise. You know him." "I know of him." He moved back to the desk but did not sit. He stood behind the chair with both hands on the back of it, and she could see him working through the full architecture of what it meant. "I have been building a picture of the Yaltov network for the past year. Strand has appeared in that picture. He is connected to the Yaltov organization, but not as a subordinate. He is something more difficult to categorize. He moves between legitimate finance and other things. He has been in Boston for 18 months, and he has been positioning himself carefully." "Is he the one who tried to kill you?" Stellan looked at her steadily. "That is what I am trying to determine. And I walked into this house without knowing that my father might be." She stopped. The sentence was too improbable to finish. "The world," Stellan said, "not without something like bitterness, is always smaller than people believe. Always." She stood. She needed to be standing. "Does this change things? For me being here?" "It complicates things." He said it carefully, not cruelly. He was being precise, which was a different thing entirely. "Marlo, if Strand knows you are here, that changes the geometry of this situation in ways I am still calculating. He doesn't know I exist." She said it with a steadiness she had built over years of saying it. "My mother made certain of it. He has no reason to know about me. He may have reasons you are not aware of." Stellan's voice had shifted register. The management in it had thinned. Underneath was something more direct. "In this world, blood is a fact whether or not it has been acknowledged. If Strand has been watching Boston, if he has been building a network, there is a reasonable possibility that he has encountered your name. A doctor in South End. Your mother's daughter." She thought of Harlan's words from 2 days ago. "Someone knows a doctor was called. You think he might know I'm here?" "I think caution is appropriate." She looked at him across the desk. At the man she had spent 9 days in close proximity to, whose vital signs she had charted every 2 hours, whose face she had studied in extremity and in partial recovery, and in the careful daily negotiations of captivity. She had been reading him for 9 days the way she read patience. The body does not lie the way the voice does. The body keeps the true record. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Continue doing what you're doing," he said. "Keep me alive, which you have done well, and tell me if you see or hear anything that seems relevant. Anything at all, and in exchange." "In exchange," he said, "I will tell you what I know about Alexa Strand." He paused. "If you want to know." She thought about the wooden box at the bottom of her mother's closet, the photograph face down for 30 years, the names and the silence, and the specific cost of a life organized around not knowing. "Yes," she said, "I want to know." He told her that evening. He told it without theater, without emotion, in a flat and precise register she was coming to understand as his honest voice, the one he used when he was not managing the room. He sat across the desk and laid it out like a case file, and she listened and did not write anything down because she was afraid that writing would make it too permanent before she was ready. Alexa Strand had been in the early 1990s a man with specific skills and no particular loyalty to any single structure. He moved money between places it was not supposed to go. He knew people on both sides of things that had only one official side. He was flexible in the way that intelligent people are flexible when the old order collapses and they are young enough to become something new. He had built a network, not purely criminal, not purely legitimate. Import-export the spaces between institutions where a man with his particular gifts could be genuinely useful to several competing parties simultaneously. He was connected to Yaltov the way a contractor is connected to a developer. He provided services. He maintained deniability. He was not a soldier and he was not a boss. He was something more difficult to remove than either. For the past 18 months, he had been building a position in Boston specifically. That is why you have the photograph, Marlowe said. Yes, I had him as a Yaltov associate. I did not have his first name until now. He looked at her. Thank you, he said. Don't, she said. I didn't tell you as a gift. I told you because I couldn't carry it alone. I understand the difference. She believed him. The attempt on your life, she said. Was it Yaltov or was it Strand or were they working together? That, he said, is the question. He stood and went to the window. Yaltov is aggressive. He has moved into 3 cities in 2 years using the same pattern. Destabilize the existing organization. Fill the vacuum. He is not subtle. He paused. The shot that put me on that sofa was not a Yaltov operation. Too clean, too informed. The level of detail required suggests someone with specific access. Strand, she said. Strand? Or someone working for Strand, or someone Strand sold information to. He turned from the window, which is why I need to find who in this organization gave him that access. A traitor. He said the word the way some men say something that is beyond profanity. Flatly, with enormous compression underneath. Someone who has eaten at my table. Marlowe thought of the people she had cataloged in 9 days. Constance moving through the kitchen with her quiet practicality. Harlan in his office with his precise silences. The guards whose faces she had learned, the 2 young men who ran errands and drove cars. You have a suspicion, she said. I have several, and no proof. He looked at her directly. Until I have proof, I cannot move. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Why you are still here? She did. She was assembling it. He was keeping the circle small while he worked out which of the foundations were hollow. You're more vulnerable right now than you've ever been, she said. Yes, and you've told me this. Yes. His eyes did not move from hers. Because you're here. Because you need someone you can trust, she said, finishing the thought carefully. And you've decided that I'm safer to trust than most. Something in his expression shifted by a very small amount. That is one reason, he said, and left the others unspoken. She left them there too. Benedict Crowe arrived on the 10th day without warning. Marlowe was in the kitchen with Constance when she heard it. The crunch of gravel, the particular quality of a car arriving at speed. Then voices in the entry hall, one of them knew faster than the voices she had learned, carrying a warmth that the house did not usually contain. He'll want feeding, where Constance said, not looking up from the stove. He always does. Marlowe went to look. Benedict Crowe was 29 years old and looked exactly like his portrait, except more so. The easy smile was present and fully deployed. Dark eyes moving around the hall with the quick pleasure of someone returning to a place they genuinely love. He was dressed in the slightly disheveled way of someone who had traveled without caring much about the traveling, and he was shaking hands with one of the guards and asking after someone's family with the specific warmth of a person who actually remembers the names. Stellan was in the doorway of the study. He should not have been standing. Marlowe was already making the clinical note. And his face had done something she had not seen it do. It had opened, just enough. Just by the small amount that was, she was beginning to understand enormous by the standards of what his face usually permitted. Then Benedict saw her. The smile turned toward her with its full attention. He crossed the room in 4 strides and extended his hand. You must be the doctor. Benedict Crowe. He shook her hand warmly and held it a beat longer than necessary. You saved my brother's life, which means I owe you more than I can calculate. Marlowe Voss. He looked back at Stellan. You were supposed to call me. Stellan's voice was dry as parchment. You were supposed to stay in Seattle. Benedict smiled. I found out from a contact in Boston. He was completely unapologetic about it. He looked back at Marlowe. How is he? Truthfully, not the version he's been sending me. Marlowe glanced at Stellan. Stellan's expression gave her nothing, which was itself a kind of answer. It confirmed that the version he had been sending his brother had been carefully edited. "He's recovering well," she said. "The wound is healing. The fever is gone. He needs rest and limited activity for at least another week. He pushes harder than he should." "Has he always?" Benedict said, and it was not quite a question, and it landed with the precision of someone who has spent a lifetime watching the same pattern repeat. "Come inside," Stellan said, and his voice had something in it that belonged only to this dynamic. Something that was neither command nor request, but a third thing that existed only between them. Dinner that night was the strangest thing Marlowe had experienced in a strange 10 days. Constance made enough food for a much larger table: braised short ribs, a pasta that smelled of the sea, bread from somewhere she never saw. They sat in the dining room, Stellan at the head, Marlowe to his right, where Harlan had put her because she was the physician and proximity to the patient was professional. Benedict across from her, Harlan at the far end like punctuation. Benedict talked. He talked about Seattle and a building he was designing and a conversation he had overheard in a coffee shop that had made him think about the nature of public space. He talked with his hands and his face and his whole body, filling the room with a warmth that Marlowe registered after the second glass of wine was deliberate. He was managing the atmosphere. He was very good at it, good enough that it took her until the second glass to understand it was a skill, not simply his nature. She watched Stellan across the table. He was watching his brother too, in that attentive way of his. But underneath the attention was something else, something that was simply glad. He ate more than he had all week. "You're studying us," Benedict said. She looked up. She had not realized she had been caught. "I study people, occupational habit. And what have you found?" He gestured between himself and Stellan with his fork. She looked at Stellan. He looked back at her, his expression giving her nothing. "I see two people who know each other very well," she said carefully. Benedict smiled, the real one now, less performance. "He worries about me," he said. "He has since we were children. He thinks the world is dangerous." "He's not wrong," Stellan said. "He's not wrong," Benedict agreed, and the lightness fell away entirely. He was looking at his brother with something that contained everything he had just said: the worry and the love and the particular grief of having grown up in a world that did not offer a true outside. "And I love you for trying to build one," he said. "But it's getting smaller, Stellan. You know it is." A silence fell over the table. Harlan looked at his wine. Constance came in with more bread, read the room, and retreated. "It will hold," Stellan said. His brother looked at him for a moment longer, with the real smile a little sad. Then he turned to Marlowe. "Tell me about yourself, Dr. Voss. You're from Boston, originally from Portland. My mother passed 2 years ago. She was the only family I had. She said it the way you say it after 2 years of practice, evenly, without the raw edge." Benedict's expression shifted into something genuine rather than performed. "I'm sorry, what was she like?" The question surprised her. Most people offered the condolence and moved on. "She was—" Marlowe paused, finding the right word: complicated. "She had a life before I was born that she never quite managed to fit into the smaller one she ended up with. But she was smart, ferocious in her own way. She kept everything she wanted to keep and let go of everything she decided not to carry." She felt Stellan's eyes on her. She did not look at him. "Mine was quiet," Benedict said. "Our mother, quieter than everything around her. She kept roses. There are still roses in the garden in summer." He glanced at his brother. "Stellan tends them himself, won't let anyone else near them." She did look at Stellan then. He was looking at his wine. His face was doing nothing at all. The careful nothing she had come to understand was a kind of response. After dinner, she walked the garden. She did this most evenings now. The guards had learned the hours of it, and she had learned to not notice them, a mutual fiction that served everyone. The garden was beautiful even in February. The structure of it was clear even under the frost. The low hedges and the gravel paths and the bare arms of climbing roses against the south wall. She could imagine what it looked like in summer. She did not hear him approach. "You should be inside," she said without turning. "It's well below freezing. I have a coat." He came to stand beside her. He did have a coat, dark wool heavy, and he was moving better than he had been, the wound healing in the steady way that clean work heals. "My brother likes you," he said. "Your brother likes everyone." "No," he said it simply. "He performs liking everyone. When he actually likes someone, it's different." He asked them about their mother. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the rose wall. The scar through his eyebrow was more visible in this light. He's not involved in the business, she said, as much as possible. He was echoing his own words from the staircase. He knows what we are. He's not blind. But he lives in Seattle and he builds things and he keeps a separate life. I make that possible. You try to. I try to. Something in his voice that was not quite ease. That was never quite ease. It's the only thing I've built, he started, and stopped. That you're not ashamed of, she said. He looked at her then, with something underneath the calculation that she was learning to name though she had not named it yet. Yes, he said, that's it exactly, and looked back at the roses. They stood in the cold until she told him he needed to go in. He went in without argument. She stayed a little longer with the frost and the dark and the thing that was happening between them, which she had not yet allowed herself to look at directly. On the 11th morning, Harlan came to the library. He sat across from her and his expression was more contained than usual, which was saying something. Captain Fallon called, he said. Webb Fallon, Boston PD, she waited. He called on a line he should not have access to. He asked about a woman being held at this property. A doctor. Someone told him, I'm here. Someone told him yes. Harlan's face was very careful. Fallon is not entirely independent. He has relationships with several organizations. He paused. He has historically been cooperative with this family. We believe he has been offered something more. He's been turned. We believe so. He looked at her directly. If Fallon knows you're here, that information goes wherever he's been sold to. We need to understand who that is. And we can learn something from how he behaves when he comes. He's coming here. He will request a welfare check. Official capacity? He will want to see you. Confirm your status. He held her eyes. I need you to be calm when he does. She thought of her mother, of 30 years of a specific kind of calm. I can do that, she said. He will also be looking for information he can carry back. The way he frames his questions will tell us things. He paused. Stellan wants to speak with you before Fallon arrives. She followed Harlan through the house she had learned in 11 days. The third step from the bottom of the main staircase that creaked. The way the light shifted through the west window in the mid-morning. The arrangement of rooms that made sense once you understood that the house had been designed to let the person at its center see without being seen. Stellan was at his desk. She opened her mouth. I know, he said before she could speak. Not a command, something else. She closed her mouth, sat down. He had a map on the desk. Street map of Boston with markings she could not read from the doorway. Fallon will ask if you're being held against your will, he said. What do you say? Whatever you want, he said, and looked at her with complete steadiness. I mean that. If you tell him you want to leave, I will arrange it safely. Someone I trust will take you. He held her gaze and did not look away. I should have told you that sooner. I won't keep you here against your will. She absorbed this. She thought of the evening in the garden, the dinner, Benedict's careful observations and the roses in the cold. And if I stay, she said, something moved in his eyes, very controlled, very present. Then I would like your help, he said. Finding the person in this house who sold my location. She looked at him across the desk, at the man she had chosen in the past 11 days to read with more care than she read most things. Tell me what you know, she said, about everyone in this house, and I'll tell you what I see. Captain Webb Fallon arrived at 3 in the afternoon. He came in a city-issue sedan, and with the careful non-expression of a man who had spent 27 years learning exactly how much to show. He was 55, lean gray at the temples, a quality of watchfulness in his face that Marlowe recognized as professional. The same watchfulness which she carried, the occupational inheritance of people who have learned that what they miss can cost someone everything. Marlowe met him in the sitting room, alone. This had been Stellan's clear preference, and she had agreed because the logic of it was sound. A man with 2 paychecks would be more informative when not being watched by the man who signed one of them. Fallon came in and looked at her with eyes that were doing several things simultaneously. Dr. Voss, he said it with the weight of someone who has rehearsed how to say it. I'm glad you're all right. I'm fine. Thank you for coming. We received a concern. He was already moving his gaze around the room with the systematic thoroughness of a professional. That you were being held here against your will. That's not accurate. She kept her voice pleasant and level. I'm here voluntarily. I have a patient with a complex presentation who required extended monitoring. I've been in contact with my hospital throughout. She paused by exactly the right amount. Who expressed a concern? Something moved through his face quickly. Anonymous tip, he said. We take them seriously. Of course. She watched his hands, his eyes, the small involuntary adjustments that bodies make when they are working in multiple directions at once. Is there anything else I can help you with, Captain? The patient, he said. I'll need to. He's resting. She kept her tone completely neutral. He had a significant procedure recently. Visitors are limited for medical reasons. You understand. Fallon looked at her for a moment. Then his gaze moved around the room again. To the window, to the furniture, to the section of wainscoting near the corner that if you knew the house, you knew was directly adjacent to the narrow corridor that connected the sitting room to the kitchen pantry, to the door that was not visible from the front of the house. He was looking for something specific. She let him look. You're free to leave at any time, he said. Of course. No one is preventing me. She held his gaze steadily. I'm a doctor doing my job. He nodded slowly. He believed perhaps 40% of it, she estimated. The other 60 would report what it had seen and heard to whoever was paying for the information, and that was the point. He said a few more things. Pleasantries, procedural observations. She answered them and walked him to the door and watched the sedan pull back through the iron gate. Then she went upstairs. Stellan was waiting. What did you hear, she said, because she knew he had been listening. Audio somewhere in the walls of a house that had been built by a man who understood the uses of architecture. He was looking for the service door, she said before he could answer. The one off the pantry on the northwest corner. He looked at the wall twice, the section near the fireplace. He turned from the window. His jaw was tight. He knows the interior layout, she said. Not from the outside, not from a floor plan. He has been inside this house. More than once. Silence. The people who have been here more than once, Marlowe said. Give me the names, not just who's here now, anyone who has had regular access in the past 2 years. He looked at her. She held his gaze. I'm not in your world, she said. I see things you're too close to see. Give me the names. A long pause. Then he reached into the desk and produced a handwritten list and placed it on the desk between them. They worked for 2 hours. It was systematic, efficient. The two of them moving through each name with a shared economy that had apparently developed across 11 days of vital signs and amber light and late conversations and things neither of them had said directly. She read the names and asked questions. He answered them with less filtering than he usually applied. She listened not only to the information, she listened to the quality of his silences. What he gave quickly, what he held before answering. She was doing 2 things simultaneously. She was analyzing the names and she was analyzing him. She had done this with patients for 9 years. You listened to what they said and you listened to what they left out and you listened to the body's insistence on its own truth when the mind was constructing a different story. There was a name on the list that she circled back to twice. Corvin. Who is Corvin? She asked the second time she reached it. His cousin. He said it in the flat voice. 46. He has run the North End operations for 6 years. He grew up in this house. He's not here now. He's been in New York. On business. Since when? A longer pause. 3 days before the shooting. Silence. She set the pen down. Stellan, she said. He stood. He went to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and the February light was failing outside, the early dark of winter coming down like a curtain. He's family, she said. Yes. He grew up here. Yes. She kept her voice gentle, the way she kept it gentle when she had to tell someone something they were not ready to hear. The specific softness of a doctor who has learned that the truth does not require force to land. You've known for a while, she said. He was very still. You held that pause for 3 full seconds when I read his name the first time. When I asked where he was, you told me New York before I asked how long. You gave me the number of days before I asked for it. She paused. Those are the details you carry about someone you've been watching, someone you've already started to grieve. The silence that followed was the longest they had shared. I suspected, he said finally. The word came out with the specific weight of something that has been held a long time. I didn't have proof. You do now, she said, or close enough to know the direction. He turned around. His face was doing its careful nothing. But there was something underneath it that was not nothing at all. Something that was a kind of grief that had no proper address. He was a man looking at the confirmation of what he had already known in his body for weeks, maybe longer, and the knowing and the confirmation were two very different kinds of pain. "What do I do with this?" he said. He said it the way people say things they have never said aloud before, stripped of management, the raw form of the question. "You gather what proof remains to be gathered," she said, "and then you decide what to do with it." The second part she paused is not mine to say. He looked at her for a moment more. Then the decision snapped back into place, the dawn returning to the surface of the man. "Stay in the house tonight," he said. "Both doors. I always do." And then, because the moment required something more than management, something real between them rather than performed, she said, "Stellan, I'm sorry." He looked at her. The word had surprised him. He absorbed it with the particular stillness of someone receiving something unexpected. "Don't be," he said. "You told me the truth." "That is," he paused. "That's rare." She gathered her notes and her pen and left him at the window with the dark coming down. In the corridor, she stopped and put her back against the wall and breathed slowly and steadily until her pulse settled. She had spent 11 days in a house that was not hers. She had kept a man alive and read a betrayal in the pauses of his voice and started to understand what was happening between them in a way she had not permitted herself to understand until now. The proof came from an accountant. Harlan produced him on day 13. A small man named Pruitt who had been keeping two sets of records for the Crow family's legitimate holdings for the better part of a year. One set for Stellan, one that went elsewhere. The elsewhere had been an untraceable digital transfer account until Pruitt made the kind of mistake that accountants make when they are afraid and moving fast. A shared routing number used twice. Harlan's people had followed the thread. The thread led to a shell company in Delaware. The shell company led to a law firm in Midtown Manhattan. The law firm's client list included, among others, a Corvin Crow. Harlan showed Stellan the documents in the study on the morning of the 13th day. Marlo was there because she had been there for breakfast, which had become, without discussion, a routine, one of the small structures that had assembled themselves across 13 days without being named. She watched Stellan read. When he finished, he set the papers on the desk. He was quiet for long enough that even Harlan, who was himself a veteran of significant silences, shifted slightly. "How much?" Stellan said. "Enough to fund the intelligence Yaltov needed," Harlan said. "The routes, the timing, the secondary entrance on the northwest side. 3 payments, over 4 months, yes." Stellan nodded. He looked out the window. The February light was changing this week, she had noticed. Something less absolute in it. The frost thinner on the gravel. The roses on the south wall had begun to say something at their base, something green and improbable, which March does whether or not you are ready. She watched his profile. The jaw, the scar, the quality of contained force that today had a different character. Heavier, more specific. "Where is he now?" Stellan said. "New York." "Still. Keep him there." Stellan turned from the window and looked at Harlan, and something passed between them. The kind of look in which a decision moves from one person to the other and is received without words. "I want Fallon traced first. I want the Yaltov connection confirmed before anything else." He paused. "And then we move." Harlan left. Stellan stood at his desk with the documents and did not move. Marlo stayed in her chair. She did not pretend she had not heard. She did not offer comfort that would not have been welcome. She sat with the weight of it alongside him. "He was at the funeral," Stellan said. "When my father died. Corvin was 14. He stood next to me the whole day. He said," he stopped. "He said he would never let anything happen to me." She said nothing. He said it the way children say things, when they mean it completely. She thought of her mother in the hospital room, the things that get said when someone is leaving, the promises that outlive the people who make them. "People change," she said. "In this world, it has to unmake who they were." He said it with a finality that did not invite argument, because if it doesn't, the whole thing falls. She understood. She didn't agree, and she didn't disagree. She sat with the truth of it, that in his world, the unmakeable thing had to be made. Not because he wanted it, because the architecture required it. "What can I do?" she said. He looked at her, that particular attention, the thing beneath the calculation present in increasing proportion across 13 days. "You're already doing it," he said. Corvin Crow arrived at noon. He arrived the way he always arrived, Harlan had told her in the same black car he had used for 10 years, with the same two men who had been beside him that long. He carried himself with the proprietary ease of someone returning home. That was what made it worse to watch. Marlowe stood at the library window. He was 46, solidly built. The crow jaw was there. She had traced it through 3 generations of portraits in the upstairs hallway, but his face had a smoothness to it that Stellan's did not. A quality of surfaces kept deliberately calm. He looked up at the house as he stepped from the car. Not the way Benedict had looked at it, with the quick warmth of someone coming back to somewhere they loved. Corvin looked at Villa Ashford the way a man looks at a problem he has been living inside for a very long time. She stepped back from the window. She was not part of what was about to happen. Stellan had communicated this in his way, not with instructions, but with the precise arrangement of silence around the subject. She had her chair, she had the Dante, she had the afternoon. She read and did not read and listened to the house. Benedict came to the kitchen at 3. He sat across from her with coffee, neither of them touched, and told her what had happened, in a voice that was steady, in the way things are steady when a person has decided steadiness is the only option available. Stellan had let Corvin arrive and settle, had offered wine, which Corvin accepted, had asked about New York, about the business there with the courtesy that this world requires, and that served as its own kind of pressure. The longer the courtesy went on, the clearer the message that what followed had been chosen rather than provoked. Then he put the documents on the table. Corvin looked at them. There was a long silence. And then he cried. He didn't deny it. He looked at the papers and he cried. He said he had carried old debts for 3 years. People he had borrowed from in a moment of need who had come back with interest that kept growing. He had been paying them in increments and they had kept asking for more, and eventually they asked for something he told himself he could give without real cost. Routes, schedules. He believed he said that it would lead to pressure, that Stellan would pull back from the territory dispute and the whole thing would be finished. He never told them to kill you, Benedict said. He said that as though it were a border that meant something. Marlowe was quiet for a moment. He was lying, she said, about what he believed would happen. Benedict looked at her directly. I know, he said. Stellan knew. He paused. But Stellan told me afterward that he could see both of them at the same time. The man with the documents and the boy who stood beside him at their father's funeral and said he would never let anything happen to him. He said seeing them both at once was the hardest part of the whole day. That is the worst kind of betrayal, Marlowe said. The kind that does not cancel what came before it. It just exists alongside with, and you have to carry both. Benedict looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. That is exactly it. What happened? He is being held. Secure. Benedict said the words this world used for the things it did not name directly. Before they took him, Stellan asked him who else in the network Yaltov had reached. He asked once. Corvin gave him 3 names. Marlowe absorbed this. Is Stellan all right? Benedict looked at her, and his expression held the answer before his voice did. He will be, he said. He is doing what he does, but tonight I think he should not be alone with it. She found him in the study at 7. He was sitting back in his chair with a glass of whiskey he had not been drinking, looking at the wall across from him. The lamp was on. The amber light fell across the desk and across his hands and across the still lines of his face. She sat in her chair without announcing herself. He looked at her. Tired, he said when she asked how he was. I have been holding 2 versions of the same truth for a long time, knowing and not knowing simultaneously. There is a specific exhaustion to that. She thought of her mother. Delia Voss had done the same thing across 30 years, building each day around the careful management of what she knew and what she allowed herself to feel about it. It does take everything, she said. My mother spent her life at it. I used to think the illness was what wore her out. I understand now it was the weight of the other thing. The daily effort of it. My father told me everything the night before he died, Stellan said. He said it without setup, which was how he said things that mattered. I was 22. He had been ill long enough to understand what was coming. He sat me down and gave me the full account of it, everything he had built and how and what it would require of me going forward. Were you angry? Not at him, at the fact of it, at the architecture, that I was always going to be here regardless of what I chose because some things are decided before you are old enough to decide anything. He looked at his glass. I want to be clear. I chose to stay, eventually and completely. I chose it. I know, she said. You told me. Inheritance is the condition. Choice is what you do inside it. He looked at her. She met his eyes. What I didn't know, he said carefully, was that it was possible to want something outside of it, something that had nothing to do with what I inherited. She held his gaze across the desk. He stood, came around the desk and stopped in front of her. She stood too, because sitting while he was standing felt like the wrong geometry for this moment. He was close enough that she could see the old scar through his eyebrow clearly in the lamplight. Close enough that the distance between them was a decision rather than a fact. I told you what staying would mean, he said, that I can't make it safe, that I'll fail at it sometimes. You told me, she said, and you told me you were choosing anyway. I told you. He reached out and put his hand against her face, his thumb at her cheekbone, and she leaned into it by the small exact amount that was not small at all. I love you, he said, not as a declaration requiring response, as a fact being stated by someone who has verified it carefully and is now reporting the result. She looked at him. I know, she said. I've known for a while. She paused. I love you too. Since somewhere around the second week when you climbed the stairs you weren't supposed to climb and looked at your brother's portrait and didn't know I was watching. He was quiet for a moment. That's very specific, he said. I'm a specific person. The corner of his mouth moved. Not the shadow of something. The actual thing. Small and real and entirely his. She put her hand over the one he held against her face. They stood in the amber light of the room that had been theirs since the first night, the room where everything between them had happened, and the house breathed quietly around them, with the memory of everything it had held. On the 15th day, Stellan went to meet Grigor Yaltov in the North End. The meeting had been requested through channels. Yaltov had sent word that he wished to speak. The attempt on Stellan's life had been the message it said a misunderstanding. There were mutual interests to discuss. Harlan read the message aloud in the study while Marlowe and Benedict listened. He's afraid, Benedict said. 3 of his people in Boston have gone quiet this week. Fallon is under internal review at the department. Someone made an anonymous call with enough specific information to open a formal inquiry. Yaltov is overextended and he knows it. He wants to confirm I'm alive, Stellan said flatly. That too. Let him, Marlowe said. The room looked at her. Let him see that you're alive and functional, she said, and present. Then you'll know more than you know now about what he's actually asking for. She's right, Benedict said. The meeting itself is information. Stellan looked at her for a moment with the expression she had come to find she thought about when she was not in the same room with him. You'll stay here, he said. I know. He looked at her. Marlowe, I know you mean it, she said. Go. Come back. He left with Harlan at 6 in the evening. Benedict had attempted to go with them and had been prevented, which Stellan had managed by the simple method of being in the car before Benedict reached the door. The house was strange with them gone. Marlowe sat in the kitchen with Constance, who was shelling dried beans with the methodical calm of someone who had done this in other tense evenings across 4 decades of service to this family. The television was on in the next room for noise. The kitchen smelled of whatever Constance had made for dinner and of the particular cold that pressed against the old windows in February. Marlowe's phone sat on the table in front of her. She had gotten it back a week ago when Stellan had decided the situation had changed enough to permit it. She had answered texts from 2 colleagues. She had called no one because there was no one to call. Her mother was gone. She had kept herself deliberately small and portable across years of moving and choosing emergency medicine, because emergency medicine asked everything of you in a moment and nothing between moments. The phone rang at 7:43. The number was one she did not recognize. She answered. Marlowe. The voice was accented, something from further east than Italy, cold and precise in the way of someone who learned English as a professional tool rather than a native language. You don't know me. She kept her voice completely level. Say your name, she said. A pause. You know my name, the voice said. I believe you have known it for some time. Your mother was a woman who believed in preparation. She looked at Constance, who was still shelling beans. She stood and walked to the window that faced the dark frozen garden. Olexa Strand, she said. Yes. A pause in which she heard him breathing and heard her own pulse and heard the distant sound of Constance's quiet work behind her. I need you to listen carefully, the voice said. The men your patient is meeting tonight. Yaltov is not alone. He has brought a second team. They will enter from the Abbott's Lane side. 4 men. You have 11 minutes from now. She felt something cold and specific lock into place inside her chest. You're warning me. I am warning you. Why? Because you are my daughter. His voice was even, precise, as though this were information being conveyed rather than something being felt. And because I have been building toward a particular outcome for a very long time, and that outcome requires Stellan Crow to remain alive. She was already moving, walking back through the kitchen toward the corridor. Why should I believe you? Because I could have given this information to Yaltov 6 months ago, and I did not. A pause. Because your mother left me, and she was right to leave me. And the one thing she gave me without knowing she was giving it was the knowledge that you existed. He paused again. I have been watching you for 2 years, Marlo. You are your mother's steadiness and my ambition. I know what you have been doing in that house. I know who you are becoming for that man. He paused one final time. And I am not going to let him die because a frightened man is afraid of what he built. Call Harlan Day, Strand said. Tell him Abbott's Lane. 4 men, 9 minutes now. She hung up and called Harlan. She didn't say hello, didn't explain. She said Abbott's Lane entrance, second team, 4 men, 9 minutes, and heard Harlan's voice change register on the other end into something flat and operational, and then she hung up and walked back to the kitchen. Constance was still shelling beans. Marlo sat down. She put the phone on the table. She looked at her hands and they were steady. She found this interesting. In the distant analytical way she found things interesting when her body had taken over the management of a situation and her mind was simply observing. Constance set down the bowl and reached across the table and put her hand over Marlo's. Neither of them said anything. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the old house settling in the cold, in the distant television, and Constance's steady breathing beside her. Marlo sat with the weight of what had just happened, the voice on the phone, the accent, the precision of it, the way he had said her name the first time as though he had been waiting a long time for the occasion. You are your mother's steadiness and my ambition. She thought about Delia Voss sitting at a table, not entirely unlike this one, carrying a secret for 30 years, building a life from careful pieces, and teaching her daughter to be steady, without ever explaining exactly why steadiness would be needed. Her mother had known, in the way that people know things they cannot fully articulate. She had prepared Marlo the only way she knew how, by making her capable and clear-eyed and not easily frightened. I am not going to let him die. She turned this over, not because he was useful, or not only because he was useful. He had said something else underneath the strategy, something she was not ready to fully receive and was not going to pretend she had not heard. The phone rang at 8:31. Harlan's voice. Clipped, clean. We're coming back. Everyone is accounted for. She put the phone down. Constance squeezed her hand once and then released it and went back to the beans without ceremony. Stellan walked in at 9. He walked in the way he always walked, contained the force in him moving under the surface. But he came through the kitchen door and he looked at her and she stood up and he crossed the room and stopped when he was close enough that she could see the detail of his face in the kitchen light. You called Harlan, he said. Yes, how did you know? She looked at him. She thought of the voice on the phone. The precise accent, the name she had known since she was 17. Someone called me, she said. Someone who knew what was being planned. Who? She held his eyes. My father, she said. The silence that followed had a specific shape. She watched Stellan absorb it, the whole architecture of it, the coincidence with teeth, the impossible specific geometry of it. Strand, he said. He warned me. She held his gaze. He said he needed you alive. He said he had been working toward something that required you to remain in the game. She paused. He said other things, personal things. I don't know what he is to you strategically. I don't know what tonight changes for whatever you were planning. But I'm telling you because you told me you'd tell me everything and because I told you I would do the same. He looked at her. You said I could trust you, he said. Yes. He moved to the window. She watched the fast, structured thinking move behind his eyes. If Strand has been operating independently, he said quietly, if he has been positioning himself outside the Yaltov network deliberately rather than within it, he built the intelligence network, Marlo said. He sold information to Yaltov, but he managed what Yaltov received, enough to create pressure, Not enough to finish you. He has been keeping you functional, Stellan said. As a counterweight, he wants Yaltov removed. She paused. But he doesn't want to do it himself, because if he does, he becomes the power in the resulting vacuum, which creates the same problem in a different form. And if I do it, Stellan said, he benefits without exposure. He gets the result without the cost. Stellan was quiet. He looked at her. Marlowe, his voice had shifted. The careful management of it thinned in the way it thinned when he was being honest. I know, she said. He's my father. He's a stranger who happens to be my father. She kept her voice steady. I'm not asking you to treat him as anything other than what he is. I'm telling you everything I know. What you do with it is your decision. It has to be. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached out and put his hand against her face. Just that, his hand warm against her face in the kitchen light, with Constance very carefully occupied with something near the stove. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. I believe you, he said, and we'll figure out the best of the rest. She put her hand over his. Yes, she said. We will. Benedict left for Seattle in April. He left the way he had arrived with too much energy for the early morning with a coffee. Constance pressed on him at the door with his hands on his brother's shoulders and the real smile on his face. Less weighted than it had been in February. Marlowe stood in the drive and Benedict took her hands. You stayed, he said. I stayed. He'll try to make it difficult sometimes. He is genuinely built for difficulty. Do not let him. Difficult patients are my specialty. He laughed, the full version warm in the April air. Then he looked at Stellan and something moved between the brothers that had no words and required none, and he got in the car. They watched it through the gate. The April air smelled of earth and cold water and green things deciding to exist. The roses on the south wall were doing what they had been deciding since March. Stellan stood beside her and she stood beside him, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was one of the things she had come to understand about what they were to each other. The silences were not empty. They were full of the things that did not need to be said because both of them already knew them. Tell me something true, she said. He looked at the gate. I stopped being afraid. Long time ago, he said. When I became the Don, I learned to convert fear into something more useful. It became a tool and stopped being a feeling. He paused. I am afraid again now of specific things, of failing you, of the reach of this world extending somewhere it should not. He paused again. I can manage a great deal. Not everything, and the gap between what I can manage and everything is where the fear lives. She thought about this. I'm afraid too, she said. Not of your world, of wanting this much. I am not accustomed to it. It feels like a structural vulnerability I have not yet learned to account for. It is dangerous, he said. Yes, she looked at the roses, but everything worth having is. She looked back at him. My mother chose safety. She left and she was careful and she was alone for 30 years. She built a good life and she gave me everything I needed, and I do not criticize her. She had her reasons, and they were real. But she was also lonely in a specific way that nothing she chose could fully address. Because the thing she had walked away from was not only danger, it was this. She held his gaze. I am not going to make the same choice she made, she said. I am going to choose differently, and I am going to do it with my eyes open. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him and felt the solidity of him, the quality of someone built to last, and they stood in front of the house, named for something it had spent decades learning how to become, and watched the gate settle at the end of the drive, and the roses continued opening on the south wall without requiring anyone's permission. The machinery of consequence moved steadily through the spring. Webb Fallon was placed on administrative leave in March. By April, the investigation had expanded. The specific and accurate information that had initiated the inquiry had come from a source Fallon never identified through channels he could not trace with documentation precise enough to be irrefutable. The outcome was not in doubt. It would take time, but it would be thorough, and it would be permanent. Grigor Yaltov did not return to Boston. He had sat across a table from Stellan Crow in the North End and understood in the silence that followed that he had miscalculated the weight of what he was dealing with. The second team had been intercepted with an efficiency that communicated several things at once. Yaltov had retreated, and the retreat appeared durable, though Harlan said nothing was permanent, and Marlowe had learned to trust Harlan's assessments. The three names Corvin had given were addressed in the careful and methodical way that Stellan addressed things he had decided about. Marlowe did not ask for details. She understood the world she was in without requiring a complete inventory of its operations. She went back to Mass General in June. Emergency medicine. The world she was as fluent in as the other one, and the two now coexisted in her life with the practical durability of things that have been genuinely chosen rather than stumbled into. She drove north on 93 in the evenings and came home through the Iron Gate and found Stellan in the study or the garden, or occasionally on the evenings when she was laid in his chair with a file open on the desk and his eyes closed, which was something she found she did not mind. Alexa Strand called on a Tuesday in September. She was between patients in a corridor at Mass General, her white coat and stethoscope, and the particular focused calm of her working hours. "I would like to meet you," he said. No preamble. The same voice, cold and precise. The voice she had heard once before in a winter kitchen. She thought about it. She thought about everything. "Coffee," she said. "Public place. I select it, and I will tell Stellan before we meet." "Of course," he said. She put the phone in her pocket and went back to her patients. At the end of her shift, she drove north through the September light and pulled through the gate and found Stellan at his desk. He looked up when she came in. That particular look, all of it present, the thing she had known since the second week and had chosen since the first day of March and would keep choosing because that was what choosing meant. He called, she said. "I know. What did you decide?" She sat in her chair, the one Constance had quietly stopped offering to anyone else. "Coffee," she said. "I will meet him. I will tell you everything he says. Every word. I know you will." He looked at her across the amber light of the room that was theirs. And Marlowe. Yes, be careful. The way he said it, simply, the full weight of what he meant underneath the ordinary surface of the words. Not a command, not a worry delivered as instruction. Something more honest than either. The specific care of someone who has something real to lose and knows it and says so anyway. "I am always careful," she said. His eyes held hers. "You're yours," he said. "That's enough." She held his gaze and thought of Delia Voss in a Portland apartment, keeping a photograph face down in a wooden box, and thought of the distance between the life built around a secret and the life built by deciding what to carry forward and what to finally set down. She thought of a phone call at 2:47 in the morning and a car waiting in the dark, and the moment she had put on her coat without quite knowing why, and gone. She thought of a man bleeding on a leather sofa who had opened his eyes and looked at her, not with fear, but with the attention of someone who was already even then beginning to see her clearly. She thought of roses in September, still open, past their season, making their quiet argument against the coming cold. She got up from her chair and crossed to where he was and stood beside him at the window, and he put his hand in hers and they looked out together at the evening garden, at the fountain, running in the courtyard, at the gate standing open at the end of the drive. The last light of the day lay across the south wall, where the yellow roses held their color against the September dark unhurried, insisting the way living things insist when they have decided that conditions are no obstacle. She had asked Constance about those roses in the spring. His mother planted those, Constance had said, setting down her coffee, the year before she died. She said she wanted something that would come back on its own, something that didn't need to be told. Marlowe had thought about that for a long time afterward, about things that come back on their own, about persistence as a form of argument, about the particular stubbornness of living things that have decided in the face of frost and difficulty and every reasonable assumption that conditions are not favorable to put out another shoot anyway. Villa Ashford. She had thought about the name often, about a man arriving from nothing in 1948, with a name that meant nothing and building all of this and naming it for a quality it had not yet earned. Not a lie, she had decided. A direction, a very long and patient promise made to no one in particular and kept finally across 3 generations and one winter in Boston by people who had not known they were keeping it. The gate stood open, the roses held, the fountain ran, and Marlowe Voss stood at the window of the house that was hers now, in every way that mattered, with her hand in the hand of the man she had chosen, with her eyes open, and the September evening settled around them like something that had been waiting a long time to arrive.